How about that for a Friday night news dump? The Baltimore Ravens and Justin Madubuike agree on a massive contract extension. We talk about what it means for Madubuike, for the Ravens, and celebrate all that and more coming up next year on this Instant Reaction live edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We are your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here on this Friday night and making us your first listen each and every single day, wherever you're available on all podcasting platforms. That includes here in video form. If you want to subscribe to the channel, like the video here, I really appreciate that. Or in audio form, wherever you get your shows, you can tune in Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're 5 days a week, plus this bonus content, exciting bonus content today of Locked On Ravens, and we bring you news, analysis, updates, the whole 9 yards on this team. Today's bonus episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Wow, I'm almost kind of speechless, but it's the good kind of speechless, is the Ravens agree on a massive 4-year extension with Justin Madubuike, $98 million. So we're going to be talking about the actual specifics of the deal, what it means for the Ravens, for Madubuike. It is just an absolute massive contract, a monster contract, however you want to say. So we're celebrating this here tonight, and I appreciate you giving me some time on this Friday night here. And it's one, again, wasn't expecting anything like this, but boy, am I glad this happened. This was an absolute priority for the Ravens. We talked about it once he got franchise tagged. The best case scenario for the Ravens and Madubuike, they were to get this done. Hopefully, the best case was to get this deal done by the time free agency started, and we'll talk about that why. But let's first get into the specifics of the actual deal first. Again, 4-year contract for Madubuike, worth $98 million. Now, guarantee-wise, he gets $75.5 million of that guaranteed, $53.5 million of that at signing. So in terms of where he ranks, just based off of where other defensive linemen have signed, it is currently the second highest total money in terms of average annual value. So Aaron Donald has $31 million or $32 million annually. Madubuike comes in right around 24.5. Guarantee-wise, he just absolutely shattered the bank. He is the highest ever, right now at least, the guarantees. He is the highest in the league. So this is something for Madubuike and for the Ravens that I think both kind of understood what time it was in a sense. The Ravens knew that, look, they had to free up this money by the time free agency started, or else their offseason was going to look really, really different. And then you have Madubuike, who you could have waited if you were Madubuike to set the market a little bit and see what happens with it. You look at other market setters who are going to potentially have their contracts here with a Chris Jones or a Christian Wilkins. Madubuike decides to go first here, and I think maybe part of it was the Ravens saying, hey, you know what? We have a number. You have a number. Let's just try to work something out before free agency starts. And Madubuike gets a deal that I do think his production last year, production like that, it's really hard to find. I mean, 13 sacks. Interior pass rush is something that is so rare in today's league. And while I do know that for Madubuike, there have been conversations around with Baltimore, him in particular in the run game and him not taking on double teams, this, that, and the other. Madubuike is a very complete player, but again, no player is perfect. But for Madubuike, you have that pass rush. The Ravens have run stuffers. They have guys like Michael Pierce and Travis Jones who are run stuffers. While Madubuike himself is not a terrible run stuffer, you're paying him for his pass rush. You're paying him for the ability to go out there and bring the quarterback down and be a disruptor. And we saw with Madubuike, he was putting it together over the first 3 years of his career. This move for the Ravens, I think, is one it had to get done. Madubuike was the top priority. I know I see Zach in the chat already. Zach is a very big Patrick Queen guy, and this does unfortunately mean, Zach, in my opinion, that Patrick Queen is out of the door here. So to me, it was essentially, I don't know if you want to call it one or the other. I think Queen might have been gone regardless, but to me, I think that Madubuike had to be the priority because the Ravens, it's almost like with Queen, uber talented player, and I expect him to go and get a bag. Like he's going to go out there and get his money and be a really good player. But you already have Roquan Smith there. The Ravens wouldn't have had a player like Madubuike. They don't have a player like Madubuike. The closest thing, in my opinion, is Travis Jones, who I think is going to ball out in his own right. But you have to pay the pass rushers, and for Madubuike, this was absolutely deserved as well. So this is a big move for the Ravens, and I talked about the timing of it, and we also have some information about the other particulars of the contract. Now, the exact details haven't been released at the time of this stream, and Jeff Rebeck at The Athletic said that he hasn't seen, and I don't think anybody right now has seen the full breakdown of the contract, but to Jeff Rebeck, what he has heard, it sounds like the first-year cap number will be about $11 million. So you're essentially taking half of that franchise tag number, right around half of that franchise tag number, and taking it off your books if you're the Ravens. So the Ravens were about $10 million under the cap when this franchise tag got applied to Madubuike. They now are already, if the first-year cap hit is $11 million, they're either right at the cap or they're already under it. They have about $1 or $2-ish million to work with, and that is before any extensions, any restructures, or any cuts. So we'll get into that a little bit. We talked about it throughout the week, so if you want to listen to any of those episodes, we had great guests on, and we talk about it. But we'll get to it here on this stream as well. And I see a lot of people are excited about it. Raven76B more checking in, saying, yes, let's go. I'm so glad this is done. Zach, I know you're bummed out about it with Patrick Queen, but I think this was inevitable for everybody. Trevor saying it was deserved. Felix saying just woke up from a nap. What a way to wake up from a nap, by the way. Great news on the phone there. Raven76B more going crazy in the chat too. I appreciate you tuning in. Eli asking how much was the FT and how does the cap now look after the deal? FT, what do you mean by FT? I don't know. FT, I don't know what FT is, man. I'm just blanking. It's been a crazy 30 minutes for me. But yeah, the cap now looks like the Ravens are going to be right at it or right under it. So again, that's before everything happens with the restructures or the cuts or extension candidates. They have a lot there as well. And this is a great move timing-wise because you could have extended Madubuike after free agency. You could have had that first-year cap hit be $11 million. But by the time that happens, I mean, everybody's gone, right? We kind of experienced this a little bit last year. It's a little different, but we kind of experienced this a little bit last year with Lamar Jackson. This is something I've talked about if you're an everydayer. You've definitely heard me say it before. But with Lamar, his huge franchise tag number, first of all, the fact that you don't know who your quarterback is, I mean, that obviously impacts what your offseason is going to look like. But two, you can't do a lot when you have that big franchise tag number on the books. And it was going to be the same thing with Madubuike, where you could have re-signed a guy. And I'm not saying that they couldn't have done anything with Madubuike on the franchise tag, but it's just a huge weight off of your chest. If you're at Acosta, you have all this money to spend because the Ravens can restructure Lamar's deal, and that can open up another $11 million. You can release Tyus Bowser. That opens up another $5.5 million. Maybe you approach Ronnie Stanley either as a post-June 1 cut. That'd be $15 million. Or maybe you give him a restructure, and you get back half of that $15 million or half. Stanley right now is a $26.2 million cap hit. He can't play on that. There has to be some level of a cut or a restructure, having him be on that cap number right now. So it's going to be really interesting because the Ravens now can approach free agency differently than what they were going to have to do, where we've talked about guys like Derrick Henry or Saquon Barkley or Josh Jacobs and what that would have looked like. But now you can even, if the Ravens had space to maybe they may have been thinking, okay, with Calvin Noy and Jadeveon Clowney, let's re-sign one of those guys, and we know we might not have enough cap space to bring the other in. Maybe that's what they were thinking. Now the Ravens might have enough room to bring both of those guys back or bring one back, plus bring in another really solid veteran pass rusher to go next to those guys. Or you look at the offensive line. Maybe the money with Kevin Zeitler, right? That might have been an issue with them not getting an agreement done with him before his deadline. Maybe now you have enough room to bring back a Kevin Zeitler, because I think Zeitler would be an incredible re-addition to this offensive line. I think it'd be a mistake to let him walk. The only reason I can really think Baltimore doesn't do that is maybe they want to get younger and more athletic on the line. But Zeitler is as good as they come. So I'd very much prefer if I'm the Ravens to have him back on my line. And I see failures saying we better be able to improve this offensive line. Nano Ray 8 checking in saying, this is so happy for Madubuike, one of the best in the business. EDC made a great decision for our team. I think, yeah, Eric DeCosta figured out. I mean, he knew this the whole time, right? The fact that they franchise tagged him, and he even said it at the combine, an extension was getting worked on, but if they couldn't agree to the deal before then, the franchise tag would get done with the hope that a long-term extension would get done. Now, the free agency part of it is absolutely massive. It opens, again, just boatloads and boatloads of free agency money for them. And I don't think, again, this is not where the Ravens are all of a sudden going to go and like throw out $50 million on the first day. That's not how it's ever worked for them. But maybe they probably had like one medium move in them with Madubuike on the franchise tag. Now I think you maybe have one big one or two medium-sized ones, plus bringing back your own free agents and obviously the smaller moves around the edges there as well. So I'm really excited with the whole thing. And it's a big day for the Ravens, because this was, I think, for a lot of people, the number one priority, even outside of bringing in somebody from the outside. It was make sure Justin Madubuike is in a Ravens uniform in 2024, and that has absolutely happened, and it is very, very exciting. Coming up, we're going to be continuing to celebrate the Ravens and Justin Madubuike, their extension together, and we'll look more into how the offseason now changes for the Ravens, so be sure to stay tuned. We have a lot to dive into on this live instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by Robinhood. And did you know that if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. Now for some legal info. Claim is of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to RAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years with 3% matching on transfers, subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. We are back. Locked On Ravens, our second segment of this instant reaction live Friday night edition. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. What a Friday night. Again, I wasn't expecting anything like this. Was kind of relaxing a little bit and hanging out. And then, boom, we get the news, a 4-year extension for Justin Madubuike worth $98 million. 75.5 of that guaranteed. Crazy guarantees for Madubuike there, which, again, well-deserved on multiple different fronts for him. The 2020 draft class for Eric DeCosta, they're all cashing in this offseason. Madubuike, Patrick Queen, Geno Stone. We're going to see a couple other guys maybe get some deals as well. But this was a move that had to happen, as we talked about. And I can see the chat is going crazy. We have a lot. I see Daniel asking the exact number. It's $98 million, Daniel, 75.5 guaranteed. And I believe, I'm going to pull it back up, it's 53.5 million at signing. So massive deal for Madubuike. Comes in, again, if you missed the first part of the stream, comes in as the second highest number in the league in terms of average annual value, only trailing Aaron Donald. And the guarantees, they're the highest in the league. So Madubuike actually shattered that guarantee record as well. Yeah, 13 sacks, as Trevor says, for an interior defensive lineman. That's really hard to replicate. I mean, the Ravens really haven't had an interior pass rusher like this since Haloti Ngata, or even you can go back to Trevor Pryce, right? They've been looking for a guy like that for so long. Not that they haven't had spurts here and spurts there from guys, but Madubuike had shown the consistency this season. We saw the spurts early in his career, but we saw the consistency from him at this point as well. So I think for me, I'm really excited just to have him back with the Ravens, right? You were kind of facing some question marks there if he was going to leave. So in my opinion, we're going to figure that out. But now let's talk a little bit more about how the offseason actually changes for the Ravens. How does this deal change the trajectory of what the Ravens can do? As we talked about, and we're kind of getting some reports trickling in as the stream is going along, Jess Rebick at The Athletic reporting the first-year cap hit for Madubuike is going to look like $11 million. So the Madubuike franchise tag was right at 22.1. So you're freeing up essentially half of that money off of your cap. The franchise tag, the Ravens went from about $12 million under the cap to $10 million over it, you're essentially freeing up you're now $1 to $2 million under the cap if you're the Ravens. And again, as we talked about, that's before any extensions, restructures, or cuts. So as Dejan says here, he would love to see Derrick Henry with the Ravens. And I personally do agree with this. And when you talk about the top running backs, right, and we'll get to this a little bit more in the third part of the show, when you talk about running backs, who's available right now? It's Derrick Henry, it's Saquon Barkley, it's Josh Jacobs. I've said this on the show before. If you're new to the show, you haven't heard me say it, but if you're an everyday, you have heard me say it before. I think to me, Henry makes the most sense for the Ravens. And there are a couple of reasons why. I would be fine with the Saquon Barkley. I'd be fine with the Josh Jacobs, right? There's going to be turnover in this Ravens running back room. First of all, Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh essentially said so at the Combine. I don't even know if I expect any of the Ravens rushers who are free agents to return to the team next year. That's Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and Dalvin Cook. But you have a guy in Derrick Henry who has made his money in the NFL, right? He's not coming off of a rookie deal. He hasn't really been caught up in that whole running back devalue thing. I mean, he's not going to get the contract, I think, that, again, some of these other top players at premium positions are going to get. None of the running backs are. But for Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, they're looking for their first long-term secure payday at the NFL level. Derrick Henry has done that. I think for Derrick Henry, not that Jacobs and Barkley don't want to win, but I think Henry's like, hey, I want to go win a Super Bowl. Where can I go where still the deal has to be good, the price has to be right, but I think for Henry, it's more likely that he gets a lesser deal than a Barkley or a Jacobs. And I think Henry still provides so much value, even though you could talk about the tread on the tires and whatnot as well. I also see Trevor in here talking about Jadeveon Clowney. I see him saying to try to get a younger guy and find a Calvin no replacement, but bringing Clowney back is what he would say. I actually put out a tweet, and I put it on Instagram as well. I'm trying to fire up the Instagram a little bit too, so appreciate follows on Instagram or Twitter. But I said, would you rather have Jadeveon Clowney or Kyle Van Noy back? And there were some rumblings for Clowney. There were some people who wanted, or rumblings for Van Noy, excuse me. The overwhelming result was Clowney getting brought back. And I think, again, they're different players. Where Clowney brings, as Trevor said, that physicality. He's a beast in the run game, but also we saw him get back to what he was as a pass rusher in terms of what people thought he was going to be. But for Van Noy, both guys, honestly, brought veteran leadership. And I wouldn't be mad if either of those guys got brought back as well. I see a lot of guys talking about PQ as well. I know Zach's talking about him. Also, I see Baltimore Get Up saying PQ deserves to be paid. I just hope it's a team like the Colts, so he's chasing Mahomes. Yeah, I see Colts, Houston, Seattle, all that in the chat right now. PQ, I love PQ. The growth, his story to me is one of the better stories that we've seen from a Ravens player in a while. A lot of flat coming in his first couple of seasons. That COVID draft also, if you remember that, what makes this 2020 draft class even much more impressive to me than it already is, was that those guys had to go through the virtual workouts and the virtual OTAs. And so for guys like Madubuike and Queen and Dobbins and Malik Harrison, Geno Stone, Devin Duvernay, all those guys had a slower start to their careers. And I mean, Dobbins, he was balling out his rookie season, but the injury slowed him down. But those guys didn't have a typical rookie offseason where those guys can come in and they can get ready to go and they get to meet the coaches and go just figure out what the NFL is about. They didn't have any of that. It was all remote and they were moving to a new city and it was a mess. So the fact that all these guys essentially have balled out or did ball out and a lot of them are going to get this money and Madubuike got it, that to me just makes it even more impressive. I see Raven Ron saying Patrick Peterson. Do we get him? At this point, I don't know if Patrick Peterson is all that anymore. Great player in Arizona and even was fine in Minnesota. But his year in Pittsburgh was disastrous. He got sunned by Zay Flowers a couple of times in that Ravens game. I don't know. I see Raven Ron also saying he wants Clowney back as well. I'd be totally on board with getting Jadeveon Clowney back as well. I see Dwayne Hunter saying Henry just bought a house in Dallas. So, yeah, I don't know. These guys can buy houses everywhere. Dallas is going to be looking for a running back. Tony Pollard's a free agent, and I don't think he goes back there. So we're going to see there. But Daniel Rodriguez has a good point about the Ravens are a running team. So I think running backs can thrive in the Ravens system regardless of who you are. And the big conversation point around running backs right now, like with Madubuike, you wanted to bring him back and bring him and have him be a big part of your team moving forward because the Ravens know how valuable interior pass rush is. Running backs are still valuable, but the position is so devalued. It's not a premium position where you could still bring in a guy like a Jacobs or a Barkley or a Tony Pollard. I know people don't want Austin Eckler, but maybe even a guy like Austin Eckler and not miss a beat. With Madubuike, you're trying to kind of claw and get back to where you are with that because you're losing a consistent interior pass rusher there. I see a bunch of people clamoring for wide receivers in the chat as well. Baltimore Get Up saying Keon Coleman. And who else we got? We got Dwayne saying Troy Franklin, from Oregon there. So, yeah, the Ravens are going to have, and I think this also brings up the draft perspective too, because defensive line is no longer a need for the Ravens this offseason. I think you maybe add a depth piece if you want to draft a younger guy in the later rounds, sure. But you have Justin Madubuike, Broderick Washington, Travis Jones, and Michael Pierce. So maybe you want to bring back a guy like a Brent Urban, right? Maybe that's a guy you want to bring back. Or maybe you want to bring back another guy and you try to almost figure out, well, is there an opening for – see a lot of people wanting Calais Campbell back, but that's a 2-year deal. He's not coming back. But I think the Ravens can kind of lower their need for a defensive lineman now, and now the focus turns to the offensive line, turns to wide receiver, turns to running back, turns to edge. There are a lot of guys I see, Adonai Mitchell as well, A.D. Mitchell out of Texas, that I don't know if he falls to 30 anymore, but we're going to see what happens. But Madubuike is the big news, and I just think it's just a big old check, right? You cross the check off of the box for the Ravens. That was the number one priority for so many people. I mean, really, there's a ton of people wanting Madubuike back, myself included. Now we don't have to worry about that. Madubuike back in Baltimore, 4 years, $98 million. Still have lots to get to here on Locked On Ravens, though. Coming up, I'm talking a little bit more about free agent targets for the Ravens and just how big of a deal this Madubuike deal is for Baltimore. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have lots to dive into on this episode of Locked On Ravens Live. First, this episode is brought to you by Game Time, and there have been plenty of frustrating ticket buying experiences in my life. Sometimes I wasn't really sure if the seats were good. Sometimes I couldn't find last-minute tickets. Sometimes there are just no good deals at all. Shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event because Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With current last-minute deals, all in prices, views from receipt, and the best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And there are plenty of things to do on the Game Time app and plenty of events to explore. Unfortunately, there are no Ravens games because season's over, but we do have Orioles opening day coming down the pipeline. There are plenty of concerts as well. There are a bunch of things you can do on the Game Time app. You can find views from all your seats in the venue, plus Game Time's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with the purchase. You can see all the views from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You have all-in prices that show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out as well. Plus, they're obsessed with helping ways for you to save money on tickets. With zone deals, you pick the session and Game Time picks the seats for big-time savings. Hey, they also got to buy and change with Game Time down the Game Time app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDON, spelled LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time to the last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We are back. Our final segment of this live instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. Friday night excitement as the Ravens signing Justin Madubuike to a 4-year, $98 million extension, 75.5 in guarantees. Thank you so much for being here again. It means a lot to me. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can follow along in audio form. We're here for you 5 days a week, plus bonus content. We'll actually have a bonus episode now. I think we're going to actually do one tomorrow for Saturday and for Sunday. So we got 2 bonus episodes coming on the pipeline this weekend as free agency just a couple of days away. But the Ravens making a massive move, freeing up that franchise tag money, $22.1 million gone. We're hearing early reports that the first-year franchise tag number, or the first-year cap number, for Justin Madubuike is going to be $11 million. So the Ravens already cap compliant. His free agency is, again, set to kick off in a couple days, but they still are going to have guys they can restructure, they can extend, and guys they can also bring back. But speaking of that, I mean, the Ravens, there are a couple of key guys that I think the decisions are going to have to be made right before free agency starts. We might even get a couple of more news articles or newsworthy transactions trickling in as you see Tyus Bowser maybe getting released to save $5.5 million. Maybe you also have a guy like, I don't know, I mean, we talked about Ronnie Stanley, but Morgan Moses is another player that could free up the Ravens about $4 or $5 million in cap space if he's released. You also have maybe a Patrick Ricard, or what's his role going to be his second year in the Todd Monken offense? Or maybe you could go and even bring back a guy like a Patrick McCary on a restructured deal. He could save some money right now. The Ravens, actually, their top 5 cap hits at the moment, offensively, it's Lamar Jackson, number 1, and then you have Ronnie Stanley at number 2. So I'll read off the cap hits. I realize I should probably read off the cap hits too. So Lamar Jackson, he has a $32.4 million cap hit. That is number 1. Then you have Ronnie Stanley, 26.2. That's number 2. Mark Andrews, number 3 at 16.9. Morgan Moses, number 4 at $7 million. And number 5, Patrick McCary at 6.4. So I see Raven Ronstein. I think it's too early to restructure Lamar. Yeah, I mean, it would be. That's a move that could have gotten them under the cap just by itself, would free up about $11 million. I wouldn't be shocked if they did it, but if they feel like they have enough money from a Bowser release and a Stanley restructure, you can restructure maybe a Roquan Smith. There are going to be other opportunities there as well. But then you also have other options for them, and I think they're going to be just trying to maneuver through these last couple of days before we get to free agency in general. I see Trevor saying Henry would be awesome, but the offensive philosophy would have to switch from pistol to RPO, the traditional play action offense. Yeah, I agree. And I see Daniel saying, imagine running out the I with Pat at fullback, Henry at running back, and the threat of Lamar. I mean, that's what I'm saying, where Lamar's already such a nightmare to game plan for. In my opinion, you have Derrick Henry in that backfield. It's like yin and yang. Plus, you got to figure out how to deal with Patrick Ricard there. The Ravens are always going to be a run-first team here, right? That's what their identity is going to be. And you bring in a top-flight running back like a Derrick Henry, in my opinion, it just makes for so much when you talk about what the Ravens can do with that. I mean, you work off the play-action stuff and moving to that. It's just a lot of different ways you can work. And not that Gus Edwards isn't good. Not that JK didn't have moments in this offense, right? But Derrick Henry is just another animal with how big he is, how strong he is, how incredible of a player he is. You got to worry about the tread on the tires a little bit, but it doesn't concern me as much because he has been so durable for the most part over the course of his career, even having that much of a role in the Titans offense. So to me, when you're talking about how the Ravens can shift and what they can do now with free agency, they can be players. I'm going to be talking about just how big of players they can be on tomorrow's episode. That'll be our bonus episode for tomorrow. So maybe they were kind of, all right, Derrick Henry's the option, but maybe they can go after a guy like a Saquon Barkley now. Maybe they can go after a guy like a Josh Jacobs now, or maybe even in the corner market. You got quality guys there. Want to sign a veteran like a Stephon Gilmore, or there are other options as well. I think Geno Stone does leave, and maybe you want to sign another third safety. Does Micah Hyde make sense for that role? Jordan Poyer, or I don't know, even a guy. I don't think a player like Justin Simmons will have a role like that. He's too good of a player not to have a role like that, in my opinion. But there are a lot of things there that you can do. And I see Daniel saying now drafts should be offensive line, wide receiver, and corner. Yeah, I mean, offense, those are the 3 plus even edge. I think I've narrowed it down to the Ravens for 4 positions in round 1. Wide receiver, offensive line, cornerback, and edge. Those are the 4 that I anticipate the Ravens looking at in round 1 if they stay put at 30. This offensive line class is so deep. I don't think the Ravens are going to sign a free agent tackle. In my opinion, I think they'll probably move on from one of Moses and Stanley, and then they'll probably draft a guy. They could even draft a guy in the 2nd round at offensive tackle and probably be okay. But my thing is, I don't want that offensive tackle sitting behind a guy for a year. If you draft a guy in the 1st round, you want to have that Zay Flowers-like impact in his rookie season. The Ravens, with their window and where they are right now, I don't think you can, personally at least, I don't think you can afford to have a talented 1st-round prospect just wasting away on the bench for a season with the window the Ravens have right now. They are firmly in it. You need to capitalize on as much talent that you can get on your roster and get on the field. And a 1st-round pick is going to be that for you. I've also said this before on the show. I think I've said it every day this week. The Ravens need to have guys that can finish games at the tackle positions. The Ravens ran their thing at tackle last year with rotating guys in and out. They ran that rotation, and it worked for them for the most part. And I think part of the reason they did it was because, look, Ronnie Stanley had been dealing with the knee injury for a lot of the season. And then you have Morgan Moses, who was kind of banged up in his own right. But if those guys cannot play full NFL games anymore, you have to move on. I do not think you can win a Super Bowl with a tackle rotation like the Ravens had. You essentially have to game plan. You have to prep your roster like with 4 starting offensive tackles. And the Ravens have 3, in my opinion, with McCary factoring in as well. But you can't do that. So Madubuike maybe opens up an avenue for the Ravens to go and sign a guy or keep a guy like a Morgan Moses for the last year here. So I think that Also, Ravens Ron talking about the S position. He says he agrees with the Bowser release, but Ojabo will have to be that dude Owe too. Yeah, I think so. We don't really know who Odafe Owe is. We know that the flashes have been there. We also don't know who David Ojabo is at all. The injuries have kind of sapped us of his first 2 years in the league. So they're going to need some quality edge prospects. Maybe that is a Chop Robinson out of Penn State, or maybe you want to go the veteran route. Maybe Khalil Mack gets released. Maybe bring in a Chase Young, or I don't know what else you do there. There are other options. Leonard Floyd, Darius Smith. Maybe he goes Darius Smith round 3 and see what happens there. I see Sedarian saying tagged Wednesday, bagged Friday. Ooh, that's a liner right there. That's a zinger. I like that one, Sedarian. It's true. I think a lot of people are wondering about, well, what's going to end up happening with Madubuike? How long is this thing going to drag out? Well, I think for a lot of people, many are happy that it did not drag out whatsoever. And I think it's important, too, that the Ravens are going to be able to just kind of not coast through this whole thing, but they're not pressed to get under the cap anymore. They are under the cap now. They're right there. But obviously, you can't be done. You can't be satisfied with this. You got to still free up as much cap space as you can. As I talked about, you know the window you have right now. You know what the window is. This is Lamar Jackson's prime. You cannot waste these years of Lamar Jackson's prime by saying, all right, well, we're gonna get him next year. We're gonna get him next year. Kind of do a long form roster building process that should have been happening over the last 5 years, 6 years, honestly. And in a way, it did. I think you can argue wide receiver and the weapons they gave Lamar, they only just started with that. It should have happened a long time ago. But now the Madubuike extension frees up that money, gets you right around under the cap, and the possibilities are endless for what the Ravens can do here in free agency. Again, they're not going to go out there and spend $100 million. Don't have the money for that, and that's not their franchise MO anyway. But it does leave them to be more of a player in free agency than originally slated in to be. So coming up tomorrow on Locked On Ravens, we'll have a bonus episode. Stay tuned for that. We'll be talking about just how big a player the Ravens can be, continuing to talk about takeaways from Justin Madubuike's extension as well and what that means for the Ravens. So be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form. Either way, the support here on Locked On Ravens has been incredible. Really glad I was able to get on, do this Friday live edition reaction, and under good circumstances too, right? I think good news is always good news for the Ravens, and I'm excited to see how the Ravens end up maneuvering through this. Coming up tomorrow, again, we'll have our bonus episode, so be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back in tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.